Welcome to this episode of Framlingham College In Conversation.
Adolescence is generally, this is a bit teachy, isn't it? But adolescence is generally defined sort of between the ages of 10 and 24, which is a longer period than I thought it was definitely. Myself as well, and might surprise a few people. So it kind of can start quite early, around sort of age of 10, where we start seeing lots of changes. And there's lots of changes that happen within the brain, which are really kind of exciting. So when people often talk about teenagers, what kind of stuff do we hear about teenagers, stereotypically?
Bit of a risk taker.
Yeah, risk taker. What else do we hear?
Very I don't know, they just don't do what they're told. It's very out of place, don't really know what they're doing. Almost.
Yeah, and probably none of you, because you all seem really lovely, but what were the stereotypical things that we hear?
It's like they think they know best all the time.
Yeah.
Quite moody if you look at every TV show ever. So it's storming into bedrooms.
Or purposely doing things wrong and breaking rules.
They get a really bad rep, don't they? Yeah. Or reputation, I should say, probably. Might need to edit that part. But they get a really bad reputation, don't they? And stereotypically, it's they take all these risks, they're so thoughtless, they're disrespectful. We hear all of those sort of really negative kind of connotations about being an adolescent or being a teenager, don't we? That's what we hear. And that's really tough, isn't it, if you're one of those? Fair?
Yeah.
Yeah?
I think it can place that expectation, especially if you've seen those images of what a teenager is expected to be. You kind of almost think that all adults are going to view you as that. So what's the point in even trying to begin with?
Yeah. And I personally remember adolescence being a really tricky time. So I'm going to put it out there. I remember it really well. So I'm kind of really passionate about adolescence. So adolescence is between the ages of about 10 and 24. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about the brain, if that's helpful, because I'm hoping we'll kind of reduce a little bit of the stigma of those stereotypical kind of ideas about adolescence, if that's okay. Does that sound like a great plan?
Yeah, I think definitely, because obviously I've never really seen the fact that the teen brain would probably be different to what we expect as an adult brain. It's structurally different as well as just your experiences and stuff like that. So it's always going to affect everything that happens in our lives.
And there are actually things that happen in adolescence where your brain has an advantage over adults.
Ooh.
Probably lots of adults won't like to hear that. So if we I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of an upstairs and a downstairs part of the brain. Now, somebody called Daniel Siegel talks a lot about an upstairs and a downstairs part of the brain. So if we think about it, I'm just going to do that so it helps us to think about the adolescent brain, if that's okay. So if you think about the downstairs part of the brain being like your emotion centre, okay, now that part of the brain is developed really early, and we're talking at birth. So that's about your survival, about safety, that real emotional kind of part. So that's developed really early. So then you have the upstairs part of the brain, as they talk about in Daniel Siegel's world. And that upstairs part of the brain is a bit like our control centre. So it's about problem solving, planning, language, all of those kind of quite sophisticated kind of things. Now, that part of the brain doesn't fully develop until we're around 24. Now, interesting, that's the end of adolescence roughly, isn't it? So when you hit that sort of marker, that's when we would expect most brains to kind of be fully developed in essence. So that sounds really harsh to a teenager, doesn't it? Because it's saying you've still got a long way to go.
Yeah, but I think even 24 is quite interesting, because at that point, some people have got degrees. They've got masters even.
So obviously that's not my opinion. That is kind of what the research suggests. So now what happens in adolescence, though, is that part of the emotion kind of centre, if you want, becomes incredibly sensitive. Okay, and that's a biological marker. That's not something I've made up. But it becomes really, really sensitive. So, but equally, there's kind of bits that happen in your brain where there's what they call synaptic pruning. So it's kind of where you have lots of opportunity and lots of flexibility about learning and developing yourselves, which is great. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So there's a bit of doom and gloom. You haven't got some of those skills fully developed, but there's equally that real lovely opportunity around flexibility in your brain and that opportunity to learn things much more quickly than you might as an adult because you've got that flexibility in your brain.
I think that's quite interesting because that flexibility just shows that, like, as a teenager, we should be exploring different avenues and things to do. We don't have to know exactly who we are at one specific stage.
Absolutely. So it's an opportunity to try things and to learn things. There's a bit about if you don't use it, you will lose it at this point, if that makes sense. That sounds a bit awful, isn't it? You can still learn things as an adult, but you have kind of much faster sort of, you sort of take that information up much faster, and there's kind of lots of neuroscience around some of that. So there's kind of opportunities, particularly around learning languages, musical kind of talents, all of those sort of things that you can really kind of develop and fine tune because you've just got that great flexibility in the brain to do that. So that sounds really hopeful, isn't it? But I guess you have to have the motivation and you have to have the opportunity to do some of those things and an interest in the first place. So that's quite nice. But what happens is that we get really driven by kind of things like pleasure, excitement and reward. So that's part of our emotion, part of the centre of the brain. Now, with that comes some risk taking sometimes. So this is where people talk about teenagers taking risk. And the other thing that happens biologically is that we have a much higher drive to be connected to our peers. Now, and there's a really natural reason, because what generally happens is we move away from being so reliant on our family sometimes, not always, but sometimes. And those peer connections feel really, really dominant and important, don't they? I don't know whether you've experienced that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely feel that. Like, my friends are kind of like almost like my safe haven.
Yeah,
who I go to.
Yeah, you go to them for advice more than your parents.
Definitely.
I think definitely in a boarding school especially, where
like
your
living
friends
with
almost
everyone.
become your family in a way.
It also happens outside of a boarding school. But I'd imagine more so in a boarding school, doesn't it? So that sounds about right.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's great about that and what are the challenges around that?
I think it's so, like, if I had a problem and I spoke to my friends about it, because they're my age, they can almost put themselves in my position.
Okay.
And I'm like, but if I said, like, to my mum, she might not obviously she'll understand what I mean, but she kind of doesn't say almost what I want her to, just because she's not in the same, like, age group as me, kind of.
Okay.
But then obviously it's very conflicting because I could get the complete, utter wrong thing just because my friends have told me to.
Okay.
Which does not always happen, but yeah.
Okay, so it's a bit of a balance, isn't it? A bit of a tightrope sometimes, isn't there? So, can we so our peers kind of get us because they're similar ages, maybe we've kind of got similar outlooks.
Yeah.
And, maybe the way we talk might kind of help us in some ways, I don't know. But equally, sometimes it might be kind of
almost
not quite the right advice.
Yeah, just advice that they think they should be giving more than like what they actually believe in, kind of.
Okay. Yeah. So maybe feel a bit biased by what they think's the right thing at that age.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and also they don't have as much, like, we all have the same amount of experience of everything. We've all only been alive like 16, 17, 18 years. Whereas maybe our parents sort of have like loads more experience and they've seen things happen to them. But we're more likely to go to our friends because we'll be like, oh, but they know best.
Okay. Because they will get it. And there's that sense of your peers will get you, whereas the adult doesn't. Now, I would say there's also kind of a really natural and a really important part about doing that peer connection in adolescence. And that is about developing some of your independent skills away from home, maybe, if you're close to home. But that's really important in terms of setting you up for that longer term kind of developing your independence and your connection and your social relationships, isn't it? And we know that having good connection can be really good for our mental well-being. In fact, it's probably one of the strongest markers of it. But that equally makes it really challenging if you're an adolescent who struggles to connect for a variety of reasons. So, whether that's because, I don't know, you maybe have neurodiversity and don't feel you fit in some ways, or you feel excluded socially from the peer group for whatever reason. And that does happen, and that hits much harder as an adolescent generally. So it's sometimes also about thinking outside the box. That's kind of one of the things I've been thinking about recently more is, what happens to those that struggle to connect at this point with their peer groups? Because that happens all the time, doesn't it? If we look around, you're very lucky if you're in a lovely group and you feel really supported and you've got those connections. But what about those that don't? And maybe sometimes it's about us thinking, how do we help them connect in a variety of ways? And that's where, I know we'll talk about online stuff at another time, but that's where online kind of connections can be helpful, or different groups out there as well, to help people feel part of something. Because we know that helps us feel better in ourselves and less isolated.
Yeah, definitely. I think that a connection with your peers is obviously what you want, because it's that acceptance, it's that feeling of, that you belong somewhere. But I think that can even be difficult, even going down to the really small level. Like, I'm not trying to say it's anywhere near neurodiversity, but like, if you don't follow the trends, if you don't look like everyone else, if you dress a little bit differently, it automatically is that social barrier to everyone else. So I think that even things like that can cause disconnect, because you get the judgmentalness of teenagers sometimes.
Absolutely.
So
and that's tough, isn't it? So they can feel a bit of a pressure to be like your friends, can't
definitely
they? And that is where the social media world kind of feeds in beautifully, doesn't it? Where that can be great for connection purposes, but it can also feed that kind of need to be like everybody else and have the kind of lifestyle everybody else is having, isn't there? So, and that's where the kind of risk taking sometimes comes in, because we have such a high drive on connection. We can prioritise the connection over ourselves sometimes, in a way, because we want to fit in, and that kind of need to feel like you fit in sometimes means you maybe make some decisions to be part of a group, for example, of whatever kind. I don't want to be prescriptive about what that group might be or what you might do, because I don't want to influence or bias anything there. But it just sometimes means you make choices that you might not normally make, but it means you're part of a social group.
Yeah, or do things that you wouldn't necessarily do if you weren't part of that kind of.
Because sometimes you can have that internal pressure of feeling, well, if I don't do that, will I then be socially excluded? Yeah. And sometimes that feels like a higher risk in adolescence than doing the things that maybe you kind of know you don't want to do, or maybe you shouldn't do, or, I guess we all have those judgments internally, don't we?
Or also because you've got those perceptions of what a teenager should be, if you don't do these specific things, I'm not going to name, but, it's kind of like... you feel like almost like you might be missing out on something if that's supposed to be the teenage experience, if you kind of know what I mean.
And there's that fear of missing out at that point,
definitely.
Isn't there?
Yeah.
So that fear of missing out, that fear of exclusion is so rife. And I guess when we have a sense of exclusion, those emotional responses are just much, much stronger in adolescence, because that part of the brain is just so sensitive at that point. So, and if I think back to my adolescence, I know I feel old this afternoon, but if I think back, you have some of those first relationships, maybe, those romantic relationships, let's call them that. What do we call them these days? That sounds like old-fashioned.
I don't know.
I don't know.
Well, let's just say we have relationships, important relationships, and when they kind of fall apart for whatever reason, because that does happen, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah.
We remember those really strongly in adolescence, don't we? Probably much more than you will later on, almost. Because you're just so emotionally in tuned and you're fine-tuning all of those parts of your brain, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think it can almost, even with romantic relationships, it can feed into that pressure again, because if someone feels like they don't have that, it's that pressure that, I've got to do this on this certain time schedule, and, I'm meant to do this at this age or whatever.
That doesn't change an adult. I have that conversation a lot. There's almost like that social expectation, isn't there?
Yeah.
And I think I remember in adolescence, it's like, well, have you got, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, And that is like a real focus, isn't it? How many friends have you got? Yeah. Well, I hear my 8-year-old saying, very focused on how many friends everybody's got, let alone an adolescent, you know. So that kind of gets sort of fed into you quite early, doesn't it? That focus on you should have friends, you should have relationships. And then what happens after that, when you kind of hit the road a bit further down, is when are you getting married?
Oh, yeah.
When are you having children? You know, I chuckle and say one day they're going to add when you're going to get divorced, but, you know. So I think that kind of happens whether you're an adolescent or an adult for that almost.
Yeah.
But there is different pressures at different time points, isn't there?
Definitely.
Yeah, that definitely feeds into social media as well, because it's almost like a highlight reel of your life. So if someone is always posting about getting married or having children and you're constantly consuming that, it's kind of, you can feel a bit behind.
Yeah, and I think we all feel that, don't we?
Yeah.
So, and I guess kind of like your point where it's about connection, about fitting in quite a lot. What happens when we look at those images? What happens? I see loads of different images on social media because I have different age group friends on social media.
I think you immediately, it's that comparison to yourself, and you're told always that, you know, like, what is it? Comparison is the thief of joy or something. But even though you know that in the back of your head, it's kind of, you can't stop yourself.
Yeah.
It's just, you're immediately looking at someone else and thinking, well, how does that relate to me? And if you know, if they're off like traveling or doing something, or they've got a different body image to you or something like that, it can immediately make you feel more negative about yourself.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So they're quite biased, aren't they?
Definitely.
So they give us a biased idea about what it's like to be an adolescent or an adult, a parent, whatever it might be, really.
You're out partying all the time.
Yeah. Or
Well, I know that's
all the
later
time.
adolescence, but
So what do we post though? What do we post on social
It's
media?
very like the aesthetics, like what you almost like not even. It's almost like you always see like an Instagram reel and it's like, oh, like day in the life as a mum, and they'll put like, oh, I made this amazing smoothie bowl, like an acai bowl, and then we went to the park. But in between that, the house got wrecked, like the child ruined the house kind of thing. Like they don't show that bit though. And almost like in our age, it's like you just post like, oh, getting ready with my friends to, I don't know, go on a day out, but secretly the car broke down, like something stupid like that.
Yeah.
Like you know what I mean? Like it's
Absolutely.
like, it's not, they just post like what they think they should be posting. Like it's not really actually what is happening if you like really like know the story. I don't know, it's very different.
yeah, I think a major thing as well is definitely studying. It's like, it's very romanticised, isn't it?
yeah,
It's
yeah.
8 hours today, and it's like, no,
Yes.
it wasn't.
No, I know. Or they're sat there with like
can do that.
their
Yeah.
chai latte, and there's like
Cafe.
this beautiful surroundings, and you're kind of thinking, yeah, but you actually have to do the work as
Yeah.
well as,
Yeah.
as that. So,
So
I,
what
yeah.
does that do for us though?
I feel like we're really easily influenced by it, even if you don't think, oh, I want to be like them. You're like, just by seeing it so many times, you start to think like, ooh, that's a good idea. If you're not going out of your way to try be like them, just by seeing it so many times, you start picking little things up, and it like slowly starts changing you. But just by like what you're seeing, what you're scrolling through.
But I think that's interesting. And I think that, you know, when you were talking about your example, I was like thinking, oh, I'm an inadequate parent already by the smoothie making and the park trip. I do some of those things, but, you know, you kind of have that sense of pressure, don't you? And it might be, you know, people posting beautiful images of themselves, but actually sometimes they put all sorts of filters on those, don't
yeah.
they? And I see that
like
all the time.
airbrush and-
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like, why do we need to do some of that? And, you know, we don't get a sense of that other side of people's worlds, do we? So what does that do for you guys?
I don't know, it kind of like, I feel like it really does like put a pressure just seeing like what other people are doing, and it kind of makes me feel, well, not like if, for instance, like studying, for instance, you see someone's put on the story, like, actually my friend did it the other day, she put like a picture of her with her laptop with like an essay up, and she was in a cafe, she was with her other friend, and it's like, oh, am I like falling behind almost? Should I be doing extra work because it was like on a Saturday or something? And I feel like it's kind of, I don't know, you kind of want to do the same thing. You want to be up doing everything everyone else is doing, so you can kind of like talk about it. Be like, oh yeah, I went that and I did that, but it's not really like.
So that comes
it's not
from that
really
drive.
needed.
That comes from that drive of wanting to be,
Yeah, like wanting to be liked, wanting to have
Yeah.
something to talk about, wanting to fit in, kind of.
that social fitting in almost,
Yeah.
isn't there? So I guess kind of some of those images bring some pressures with them, don't they?
Yeah.
And that pressure to do things similarly or the same.
Yeah.
So that puts a lot of pressure on, doesn't it?
I think there's also a pressure to have that aesthetic post to be able to post, and having your Instagram will look as amazing as someone else's.
Yeah,
and
like
I think
influencer kind of.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
So somebody, well, no, I won't kind of say it like that. So sometimes I see social media posts of people who are maybe at university, and there's a lot of focus on physical appearance. And I try not to chuckle, but there's a lot of kind of sort of this. I sort of think about it, the fish kind of expression.
Yeah.
Don't know how would you describe that? Can you think of a way to
I don't know,
describe
kind
it?
of like pouting.
It's like a pouting expression, isn't it? And it's almost like I sort of think, why are you doing that? And I guess it's kind of about making their cheekbones look really nice, maybe. I don't quite know. But there's a definite kind of influence about how people think they should post almost.
Yeah, I think that's very like social media and influencer kind of, because like I don't know, you see someone and you're like, oh my gosh, like she's stunning, and then like you think she's like naturally pretty, but then she's got lip filler, she's got like loads of but like they've done that to better themselves almost, but you don't really need to. Like I feel like it's just such a big on social media. You just post something, like you make yourself look more tanned, you make yourself, I don't know, just like look better through filters, but you don't actually like need to.
So why do you think people do it?
To like fit in, probably. To just like follow like what other influence, like to almost to like I don't know, try and almost be an influencer, but in high school world. But
yeah,
I don't know. I think it is just like social media, like body image, like how you're meant to look is like such a big thing. Like you don't need to look like that. You don't, it's not really the end of the world if you have ginger hair instead of blonde hair. I don't know, something like that. I don't know.
Definitely that that social acceptance. I think even like as we talk about romantic relationships, you want to be attractive, and you want you're seeing all these people on social media, and it's like, oh, I need to look like that because she's got this and got that, and if I look like that, maybe I will have this. And I think as well, it's been quite like recently. There's been amazing campaigns with influencers stripping themselves back with less makeup, but sometimes you can even look at those photos and think, okay, if she looks like that with no makeup on, I'm a little bit worried. So I think that even though those things are amazing, you're still gonna sit there and compare yourself, but it's there's other influencers that sit there and they'll detail what they're insecure about, and sometimes you can sit there and think, wow, you look like that, and I'm thinking you're just amazingly gorgeous, and you've got all these insecurities. So I think from that point of view, it's that we all compare ourselves, and we're gonna not necessarily think that we're.
So what happens then there? Because that feels a bit like we look at social media images.
Yeah.
We might look at images in magazines. We might look at YouTube videos of people. We do all sorts of things, don't we? So what happens in our brains at that point? Is there a bit that kind of goes, I should, or maybe I need to do more of,
you start to compare,
or I might need to dress more like, to fit in almost, isn't there? There's a bit that unspoken, to fit in, I have to do all of those different things that are trendy at the minute, isn't it?
Oh yeah, fast trends. Like that's one of the main things on social media. Even something that's not about posting yourself, say like a TikTok dance, you'll be like, oh, have you done that? Has everyone done that? Oh, I need to do this. I need to post it. And then in a week, it's gone. You're like, oh, I don't even remember that.
No.
And it's like, it's just keep on moving and just keep on.
Quite fast paced though, isn't it?
Oh, definitely.
And it doesn't stop, does it?
No, or even clothing trends. There'll be something that's really in for like a month, and then you're like, oh, all right, okay, I've caught up with that, and then it's not the next month. But it's even like sometimes you'll find clothes that you really love, and then what you do is you see that no one's wearing it anymore. It's like, okay, I can't wear that. That denim jacket I really love. It's just not in anymore.
What would happen if you did?
I think like in reality, I don't know, this might be me, but I feel like in reality, no one's going to say anything.
Yeah.
Like no one, at the end of the day, no one's going to come up to you and say, that's so out of fashion, why are you wearing that? Like, it doesn't even matter if you want to wear it, like, you should wear it. I feel like everyone kind of like overthinks it too much, because nothing's going to happen. It's not like, World War III or anything.
Yeah.
So the challenge you've got, isn't it? The challenge you've got in adolescence is about that need to fit in and connect and be part of a group of people or a pair of people, whatever, but that sense of connection versus that period also being about developing your identity, isn't it? Because that is that time where we work out who we are, what we like, what's important to us. Those are kind of things we start to work out at that point, don't we? As we kind of try and gain a bit of that independence that we talked about earlier. So it's a really challenging part, isn't it? That balance of, do I do this thing to please this person over here, or do I stick to what I really believe in and value or think is the right thing, or how I see myself, really?
Yeah, I think it definitely comes down to that identity, because it's almost you're thinking to yourself, well, how do I want people to see me? How do I want, do I want to be seen as, I don't know, the girl that has all of the jewellery, or do I want to be, it's little things like that is who you want to be seen as. Do I want to be the one with the clear skin all the time? It's kind of that.
Who do you want to align yourself to, isn't it?
And then if you almost stray away from that, it's like, oh, are people going to notice that I'm slightly different to what I was, I don't know, for the last 6 months?
Yeah.
I think a lot of it, sometimes if you speak to older people, they will be like, oh yeah, but but none of that really matters and it's fine, no one cares. But in your head, it's kind of, but that really does matter actually to me right now. So
how do you then stand up and say, this matters to me as an adolescent, and it doesn't feel like taking does it feel like taking a really big risk?
I think so.
Yeah.
I feel like, I don't know, like the almost fear of rejection, even like slightly, even just like a little comment is just like would make me not do something.
Yeah.
Just like thinking someone is gonna, make even a tiniest comment like, oh, why are you doing that? And then I'll be like, oh.
And we look out for those things, don't we? Particularly, we do as adults sometimes, but as an adolescent, that, we talked about being much more sensitive emotionally. So those little comments can feel humongous sometimes, can't they?
Yeah, I feel like it really sticks with you.
Yeah.
It's like if it's like something like, I don't know, that has upset you before, or something that it feels like a bit too personal, just like anything can really, like, it can just really stay with you. Yeah. Definitely.
And we can have some really sort of, in terms of relationships we have in adolescence, they can feel really lovely 1 minute, and then the next minute can feel just really problematic and difficult, can't they? And it might be because somebody said that one little thing that feels really huge to somebody, can't it? And then you have these big fallouts, don't you, in your friendship groups? Yeah, I've seen lots of nodding around.
Oh, yeah.
Going, oh, yes.
and then you laugh about it months later.
Yeah.
And it's like,
it's fine, it's over.
What were we arguing about exactly?
And it feels maybe sometimes a bit silly a few months later. You go, oh, what was I thinking? But actually, it's that emotion part of your brain just taking over in that moment in time, and those fears that come with it, or that kind of, fear of being sort of invalidated as well in some ways, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
So it takes a lot of bravery to step out of that, doesn't it?
100%.
So
yeah,
I'm going to call it bravery, because I think it really does take a lot of bravery.
Definitely. There's a lot of things that affect teenagers today, and definitely I think we've all experienced a lot of those things and are still going on with that sort of thing. But I think what I'm wondering is, as you've kind of already gone through it, like, what would you give as advice to teenagers today?
Okay, wow, that's a huge question, Amy. Okay, I think we could say lots and lots of different things. I think sometimes it's about being brave, if that's how you feel, and you feel strongly about something, and standing up for what you believe. Sometimes it's reaching out to others if you feel you need some support. And sometimes it's also about being self-compassionate. I think that's really important, to be kind to yourself, to acknowledge that this can be a really difficult time, knowing why it can be a difficult time, and just having a bit more of an awareness about why that might be the case. and believe in yourself. Take the opportunities to do some of that lovely fine-tuning in your reins and taking some of the positive opportunities as well. I think, don't get too caught up in wanting to be like everybody else. I get why that's important though. So equally, I don't want to say don't do that altogether, but give yourselves a break as well, because I think it's much harder to give yourself a break from the pressures in this day and age, because, in the olden days, you might have kind of left school and left it there. Now you've got all the social media and it's everywhere because we have our phones in our pockets most days, all the time. So allow yourself some time away from some of that pressure and do something really nice for yourself and soothe yourself, and something that means something to you as a person. Sometimes it might feel really tough in adolescence, but it does get better. And I think just kind of remembering that is the case, and you will come out the other side.
Thanks for listening. I hope that's been really informative about the teen brain, and we look forward to seeing you next time.